Hi, my name is Lindsay Kuipers. I am here today with Dr. Tara Fortune. She's joining us from Minnesota from her retirement, and we're so grateful that she's taking the time to talk to us a little bit about what she's working on, what she's worked on in the past, and more specifically about language targets and how they're so important to spiral into our content. Tara, why is the use of language targets so important in the classroom?
Language targets are critical especially in language immersion classrooms, so dual language and immersion classrooms, because we know from research that language is the forgotten sister of these programs. It's the forgotten sister because teachers, understandably, in language immersion programs who teach language through content are primarily concerned about making sure that the students are understanding, the content targets, the content objectives. That's what they're held accountable for. That's what gets assessed primarily. So all of those things they are held accountable for by national and state standards. Language, therefore, can become the forgotten element. So language targets hold teachers, students, and programs accountable for what language immersion programs are committed to doing, which is addressing both language and literacy as well as subject matter goals. So it's the imbalance which research has shown again and again and again, highlighted the fact that the programs are very good at addressing the content needs. It's the language targets and the language needs of the learners and literacy needs of the learners that are much harder to focus on and to grow. So intention there and being specific with what those intentions are is critical to success with those intentions. And we know the more we address with intention and specificity language targets, the better the outcomes are for the program as a whole, not just the program as a subject matter success.
How do targets change the way teachers and students talk about language?
Language targets actually give them the language. So they change it because they actually give them the specific language that they share then in common and understand them in common, right? So that they can address them. So, I mean, it's very basic. It's basic and it's very difficult to do. Working with teachers over the years, what I realized is that most teachers did not have the language to construct effective language targets. They didn't have the language. They didn't have the knowledge and understanding of whatever language they were teaching. They didn't have the knowledge and understanding of the grammar of the language. When people talk about it as educational linguistics, right? They did not have the knowledge to be able to know how to talk about what pieces of the grammar needed to be specifically addressed. And one of the things that for me was what really eye-opening along the way and working with teachers to get at the effective at each targets was being able to understand that, yes, in fact, some language targets really can be acquired without super intentional foci. Some aspects of language can be acquired more naturally without a lot of intentional focus. So the art of effective language targets is knowing what language targets are going to likely be acquired without that focus and which ones are not going to be acquired without that targeted focus. That's an art.
Mm-hmm.
Because nobody has time to do absolutely everything. So you have got to take a look at what research has shown are the important targets for that specific language, the important elements. That's part of the skill that immersion educators have to hone over time. They get to know with their students what targets are the ones that merit specific attention. And oftentimes, not always, but a lot of times it has to do with where are the similarities and differences between whatever their initial language was and the language they're in the process of acquiring. similarities and differences between those two languages. That's not the only place, but that's one of the places that teachers have to look in order to better understand what kinds of targets to establish. Well-constructed language target both teachers and students the ability to have a common language to specifically name what they're moving towards. And I don't know anybody that hasn't had the experience that without a roadmap, no, what would we do now without our Google Maps, They just take us step by step. You go here, you go here, you go here, and we hear it auditorially, and a lot of times we see it visually. So you think about that sort of multimodal approach, and that's just to help get us from here to wherever it is we're hoping to get to, for our next outing. That same reality, how do we get from A to B, is what we need to do with language targets progressively over time across the grades, right? For language and literacy in a language immersion classroom, if we hope to arrive at meaningful, substantive proficiency in that additional language. This is what research has shown. The better we get at that, the stronger our programs are.
What tools have you found to be very helpful for highlighting language through content?
Some basic things that I would use would be grammar indexes. That's a tool, right? If you don't know the language of the grammar index, right, kind of catalogs and highlights things. So getting a current grammar index for the language that you are teaching, I think is very, very helpful. There are a variety of tools. I think super helpful tools are tools that identify functions in a language, the purposes for which communicative functions, purposes for which we use language to argue, to persuade, to analyze, etc. There are a variety of tools that have mapped out both communicative and academic functions for which we use language. Most languages share the functions. Where we differ then are in the forms that we use and the words that we use. So the forms and the vocabulary. So the forms are helped by the grammar index. What forms support this particular function, looking for research-based lists of academic and communicative, and oftentimes we talk about communicative as social, so social and academic functions. Those are really helpful in setting targets. Another one that I used was prototypical, because a lot of our student work will be in reading and writing, and there are structures to the prototypical genres that we use for writing. Narrative, writing and reading. Narrative versus procedural writing to teach a procedure versus writing to persuade, etc. There are prototypical writing genres and reading genres used that we know are used in school, and they're not that many. I mean, there's like 6 or so. And those prototypical writing genres can be associated with functions and forms. So, for example, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, narrative lends itself well to past tense, focusing on the past tense. That's an example. Scientific report writing is linked well with use of the conditional. For example, if then, a report writing for a report is used often for because of this, so that, right? Those are just little examples of the kinds of things that I'm talking about. We've done work in analyzing genres to better understand its structure, to then better understand what are the functions that go well with supporting that use of this particular piece of writing or reading, and then how do we, what are the forms that also lend themselves well? And research has highlighted this, that we need to, when it comes to setting language targets, I used to talk about it as the V's of language. This is what we learned from the research. The V's of language are verbs and vocabulary, so that most teachers, when they are asked Or how do they go about identifying their language targets for a particular lesson? 9 times out of 10, this was decades of work with teachers. They will tell me they'll focus on the verbs they're going to target, or an aspect of the verb, right? Oftentimes, correspondence between the subject and the verb, right? Or the tense, right? Verbs or vocabulary. That's their language objectives. It works like clockwork. So I came to call that the V's of language, because anybody who is only identifying language targets, teachers that for their language targets are routinely identifying the V's of language, are not addressing the language needs, really addressing the language needs and literacy needs of their learners, right? We need to get teachers so that in creating and identifying this common language between teachers and students, it needs to go beyond the V's of language to more comprehensively address what it means to acquire a new language, because language is this black box, right? And it's complex and multifaceted. It is more than verbs and vocabulary.
Have you observed how the use of language targets has helped with student output?
When there is a clear common language around what is expected of students, and the teacher has provided meaningful scaffolds to support the learners in reaching these targets, what you see is that students, they're clear about what's expected of them, and so they do it. One of the things that I've said so many times to teachers is the clearer and more intentional you are about what you want from your students, the more likely they are to produce it. So that's clarity and communication, specific communication, and scaffolding. You can't just be communicating without providing the scaffolds that learners need. But you communicate your expectations, provide them with the scaffolds, students can do it. Students will do it. This Mandarin immersion 2nd grade teacher and I designed and developed this unit. And we had various activities where the students needed to produce the language. They needed to even use language intentionally to create groups. In order to make their small groups of 4, we didn't let any opportunity go by without thinking through what language would they need to be able to communicate with each other so they could do that, right? So we would figure out fun ways to weave content in. So, for example, they were learning about animals and body parts of animals. So to create small groups, one of the animals that was targeted, they were very targeted specific animals, 5 or 6 of them, if I recall. One of them was a duck. And so you had your duck, but then you had the important parts of a duck. You had the bill, you had the webbed feet, you had the wings and the soft feathers. To create groups, everybody had a photo, right? And in order to find the people who were in their groups, they had to find the person whose body part, some of the kids just got a body part, other kids got the animal. They had to wander around the room and say, talk with each other about, okay, I'm webbed feet. What are you? Well, I'm wings. So there was a specific script and way they had to interact. I'm looking sort of for the animal that I go with, right? I'm looking for the animal. Webbed feet, wings. Well, you're not an animal, so you're not going to necessarily be in my group. I got to keep looking. I'm webbed feet. Who are you? Well, I'm a duck. Okay. Well, duck have webbed feet. Good. You might be part of my group. All right, let's stick together. Let's go find, and so the whole class is having to interact using vocabulary, questions, an exchange. They've got a whole exchange going on, and all they're doing is getting into groups, but all of this associates with the animals that they're in the process of learning and the animal parts. So these the clarity is in using the structures and providing them with the kind of the question and answer, the different ways, always more than one way. This is another thing that with always give them multiple ways of asking. If what you're doing is you're doing a Q&A, they need more than one way to do that if they're going to be doing it repeatedly, so they can practice and use more than one way. But recycling the vocabulary in this particular instance, as well as the structure and the form, simply as a part of getting themselves into groups. Now, if you're so very targeted and intentional about all the things that you're doing, and all you're doing is getting the students into groups, but you're providing them with an opportunity to use the language to do this in meaningful ways. Those are part of your language targets for that lesson or that day, whatever. That's just a really small snippet of an example where teachers are being intentional at multiple levels, right? At the lesson level, but mindful of the unit level, and getting down to the very specifics of the language needs in order for the kids to be able to be successful. I had the chance to observe, and we actually videotape this. What's amazing about those videotapes is that all students, everyone has something in their hands, so everybody is participating. Clarity. They all know exactly what they're supposed to say. Teacher has on the board scaffolds with some of the Q&A stuff in case they need to look to get a little bit of help with the language, right? But everybody is talking, and all of them are using Mandarin with each other. Teacher is in the background. They're using it, and they get 4 minutes. Doesn't take very long. I always say creating lessons in immersion is like Thanksgiving dinner. It takes 2 weeks to plan and prepare and a half hour to eat. So again, it takes a lot of thought and intention to design all of this. And maybe it's an activity that lasts 4 minutes, but it is a meaningful student output, rich activity where everybody knows what it is that they're communicating, what it is that they are doing, what language to learn. They've got a variety of scaffolds that they are using, including the words of the, if you're webbed feet, if that's your thing, that would have been on there for you in Mandarin with the characters so that you can see, you have all sorts of supports so that you can be successful in using the language that is so clear to you in ways that are meaningful to accomplish a specific task that then allows you to do the next thing. And it's all interconnected to the goals and the targets, the language and literacy targets of the unit at large. So that's a small example, I guess, of how when you actually get to see students having fun and enjoying the experience of being able to communicate meaningfully with each other in the language they're in the process of learning, with clear expectations, strong scaffolds, and specific language targets, you get success. And feel really good about it. And so do teachers, because that's the whole purpose.
I love it. What a great example.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's like magic when you see it. And both students and teachers are enjoying. They just really enjoy the success of those experiences because it's fun.
Thank you, Dr. Fortune, for your time. Thank you for all that you've done for immersion in the country and in each classroom that you've touched and each teacher that you've helped. And thank you for all that you've done for us at Adelingua. Our co-founders have learned so much from you, and your work seeps into everything we do. So we appreciate all that you are, and we hope that you're enjoying your retirement.
Thank you. It's been a privilege. So thank you.
Thank you.
Good work.
Thank you, Tara.